In this episode, I talk about if I had to start over from scratch, financially, professionally, everything, how would I do it? Let's get started.
Let's get some money.
From New Money, New Problems, it's the New Money, New Problems podcast, a show for successful professionals searching for the tools they need to navigate financial opportunities and obstacles they've never seen. Negotiating compensation, purchasing your first investment property, helping your family with money, the highs and lows of entrepreneurship. New money brings new problems that require new solutions. Join us as we work through them together. I'm Brenton Harrison, and this is the New Money, New Problems podcast. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the New Money, New Problems podcast. I hope that you all are having a good start to your summer. If you have school-age children like me, it is one of those things where you're like right at the start of summer and you don't yet have childcare for summer camp, but you still have things that you have to do professionally, which means you don't get to do those things because you don't have childcare yet. So it's been an interesting 2-week stretch. But I was also reached out to by a CNBC reporter recently, and they were going through a story and they were asking at the title of the story, if you were giving one piece of financial advice to someone in Gen Z, what would it be? And they were looking for the perspective from a few different financial advisors. And I won't tell you exactly what my one piece of advice was, but it just had me in the mindset of, well, shoot, I was the new up and coming generation once upon a time. And what would I have done differently if I had to start over? One of my best friends, Will Radford, has always said, I'm never afraid to take chances professionally because, yes, I've gotten to a certain place financially, professionally, but I remember the things that I did and who was around that got me to this place. And because I remember and because I was paying attention and because I was learning those lessons, if you took this all from me, I should be able to build back to where I am now in half the time it took me the first time. That always stuck with me. Like, are you paying attention? And if you are actually learning lessons, would it take you as long if you had to do it again to get to where you are now? Or in that same period of time, could you be further ahead than you are now? And for all of those reasons, I wanted to just jot down 10 things that I would do if I had to start over professionally and financially at ground zero. You've taken me out of my hometown. You've taken me out of this industry. I'm starting a new job in a new city with no relationships, no money. What would I do? And the first thing I thought of was, to me, it's obvious that if you go into a new place, a new city, you want to form as many relationships as you can. But my first step would be to actually collect as many email addresses as I could along the way. There's a number of reasons why, but I can tell you that early in my career, I was probably at 2 to 3 different networking events every single week. And back then, at least, the thing to do was to collect business cards and maybe you send a follow-up email, grab coffee with the person, but I did not really keep a database of email addresses. And I remember when I started working with Thomas Stovall, who's the consultant who gave me a lot of ideas about how to shape New Money, New Problems when we were getting started. And he was telling me, you need to start an email list. You need to take all the emails that you have and put them in a database, start to categorize them in terms of where you found these people. Because as you build a profile for yourself in wherever you choose to build it, you're going to want to be able to connect with people and tell them what you have going on. And you can do it on Instagram, you can do it on TikTok, you can do it on LinkedIn, you can build huge platforms and audiences on all those places. But if the algorithm changes, if for some reason you're locked out of your account, which has actually happened to friends of mine with sizable followings, if they just decide that they're not going to show your followers your content, you can't reach everybody. But the one thing that can never be taken from you is a person's email address. And when I look back at all the places that I've been, I truly think that there are probably a couple of thousand email addresses that I could have had if I had just paid attention, but now I don't, and I'm trying to make up for lost time by collecting the addresses in every new room that I'm in. But that's a lot of time and a lot of potential contacts lost. Now, I'm an entrepreneur, so obviously there's value in having a database of people that I can reach out to tell them about new podcast episodes and new business offerings. But this translates across all industries and work models. If you're a W-2 employee and you're laid off and looking for a new job, it would probably be helpful to have hundreds of email addresses that you've collected over the years and categorized of who's in certain industries, who's in certain roles, and to just generally tell them that you're looking for work in a way that's different and elevated beyond putting an open to work banner on your LinkedIn profile. Whatever the case may be, whatever your role, whether you use it now or whether you use those names and email addresses 15 years from now, I can tell you I can think of no negative effect of collecting email addresses along the way, because you never know when those names will come in handy. Number 2 is more financially oriented, and it may sound a little unique, but here's my take on things. Unless I was doing it to benefit my taxes in a real and substantive way, if I had a retirement account available to me, I would not contribute more than my employer was matching early in my career. Now, this may sound like heresy, because when you look online, most people will tell you to contribute as much as you can to your retirement accounts as early as possible. You'll often hear people telling you to put as much money in Roth accounts as you can as early as possible to get your taxes out of the way. For some people, that's the right move. My perspective, especially if I were starting over right now, the way that the world is there are 1,000 different reasons why having access to capital now is more beneficial than having access to capital that you can't touch without penalty until age 59 and a half. Let's say you want to pursue education, undergraduate degree, graduate degree. If you've been following along with the podcast, you know that there are new borrowing limits that have been set for both undergraduate and graduate borrowers. So now degrees that you might have been able to borrow an unlimited amount to attain, you're going to be restricted, and either you can't afford it and just don't get the degree, or after you've capped out your federal student loans, you'll be stuck with private student loans to make up the difference. If you want to pursue homeownership, I don't have to tell you that in most major cities, the cost of living is skyrocketing, as is the price of housing. And whether you're a first-time home buyer or buying your second home, it takes a whole lot of money to save up for a down payment and closing costs and furnishing a home and the repairs that come along with the home. And you can't necessarily tap into a 401k to get those funds. If you're a W-2 employee, I can't think of an industry that is not being heavily impacted by AI right now. And if you lose your job, not only have you lost it, but on average, it's taking people longer and longer to find replacement jobs in this economy, which means that you might have to have more emergency reserves in this phase of our economy than you might have needed 20 years ago in that same industry. For all of these reasons, access to capital early in your career would be my focus. And while you don't want to give up free money from a 401k or a 403b match, do not early in your career try to max out these tools at the expense of money you can touch in the here and now. Now, there's obviously an exception to this, and that is if you are doing so well and have no consumer debt and have your emergency reserves, and you have such a high income that you're getting hammered on taxes, or you're a business owner and it's helping you reduce your net business income by doing things like a solo K or a 401k, then of course you want to take advantage of these tools if they're beneficial. But a general rule of thumb I would say is, for this economy, cash flow is king, and accessible cash is much better than cash in the future. Number 3 is I would get as much insurance as I could as early as I could. Whether it's life insurance or disability insurance, some of the biggest factors that influence pricing are the age you are at the time of application and, of course, your health. And what most people do when it comes to insurance, especially before they have responsibilities like a spouse or children, is they get like a very small life insurance policy, if they get one at all, just to say they have it. And they don't think about what they're going to earn in the future. However, if you have some foresight, what you would do is you would look at the career that you're pursuing, what you think that you're going to make in the long term. If you plan to have those responsibilities, and not everyone does, I would get as much money as I could as early as I could, because most people radically underestimate just how much these prices increase with age. Number 4 is I would commit to the buy versus rent decision for a home as early as possible, and I would stick with whatever decision I make for as long as possible. If you're going the renting route and you're doing it without feeling like you're missing out on something, then you open up a wide range of opportunities in terms of being able to put more into your non-qualified investments, your retirement accounts, pursue entrepreneurship without the burden of a home that has to be maintained hanging over your shoulder. It's just something that when I come across people who make the renting decision and they're not looking over in someone else's yard wishing that they were in that same situation, they're in a much better place than you would expect financially by not having to come up with a large down payment or spend a significant amount on maintenance as years go on. If you decide to pursue homeownership, which I understand for various reasons, I'm not a person that can really rent, then you need to commit to it early so that as early as possible, you can get into a home, have time, do the benefit of small appreciations, big appreciations in market value of that property, paying down the mortgage to get some equity, so that when you get into your mid-career or later career, you have enough combination of equity, income potential that you can likely, if you've been listening to the last episodes, sell that property and get a new home that actually meets all your needs. Ironically, with that first home, as much as I possibly could, I would be trying to get as close as I could to a home that I can see myself in for a long period of time, especially if I have the option of using first-time home buyers assistance. This is something that you'll typically find in major cities or rural areas that are underserved. So you'll have institutions and nonprofits that offer home buyers assistance where you can get a loan for 3.5% down, but they may give you that 3.5% or they'll give you a fixed amount, $10,000, $15,000 towards the down payment of your home. And for many of these situations, you have to be in that home for a certain period of time to be able to sell or leave without paying back any of that gift. So for example, you might get $15,000 in down payment assistance, but one of the stipulations is you have to live in that home as your primary home for 5 years before selling or renting it out to someone else. And in order to do that, even if it means getting a little more house than you feel like you can afford, I would rather bet on your future income earning potential and get a house that you actually feel like you can stay in for 5 years instead of just patting yourself on the back to say that you're a homeowner, but you're in a house that you hate and can't wait to leave. This goes back to the conversation I've had many times about when people are trying to get a starter home or their next home. I tell them with the starter home, hey, if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing to increase your income, buy a little more home than you think that you can afford now and grow into that home. Or if that's not an option, decide not to buy at all. But the one thing I would not encourage you to do is buy a home that you don't like on the front end, thinking that somehow magically 2 or 3 years down the line, because you're a homeowner, you'll feel better about that property. Along the same lines, when it comes to home buying, number 5 has to do with rental properties. And with rental properties, I would decide to fully commit or not pursue it at all. I don't have to spend too much time on this because we just did 2 podcast episodes about real estate, but I have shared now that I do not think real estate is something that you can dip your toe in the water and do extremely well in a way that radically changes your financial future. You have to commit to doing it in a way where you either have real estate professional status or you're doing short-term rentals and you're the one that's managing those rentals. You need to commit to doing it at scale. You need to commit to tax planning in a way that's going to cost you significant money but opens up some radical opportunities. And if you're not willing to do those things, I wouldn't even do it in the first place. But if you are committed to doing those things as early as possible, make that decision, because in transparency, it's probably going to impact what you can pursue professionally because of the time that it actually takes to fully commit to real estate. And number 6, because we're moving now, we're getting some motion. Whether you do real estate or not, whether you rent or own or not, whether you're a W-2 employee or a business owner or not, as early as possible, I would commit to learning as much about taxes as possible. It's ironic that I'm a wealth advisor and so little of this podcast has to do with stocks and bonds and exchange traded funds and the like. But the reality is the thing that causes the most pain or the most missed opportunities for the people with whom we serve is a lack of knowledge around taxes. And the opportunities could be things like being a W-2 employee and not pursuing your HSA, your FSA, your dependent care FSA, not understanding how and when and why you should sell your restricted stock or what happens when you exercise stock options at your employer. And on the business side, it's the same thing. Having a knowledge of things like your qualified business income deduction, How a solo K, especially if you have a spouse, can allow you to put aside more than 6 figures per year in pre-tax retirement funds. All of these opportunities or avoided pitfalls are on the other side of more tax knowledge. So I would get books like this one, Don't Get Killed on Taxes. This was written by my friend Stephen Jarvis, who's been a guest on the podcast. We'll put the link to that episode in the show notes. And I would study up on the tax code. What can I do that benefits me? What are some legal opportunities I can take advantage of to not pay a dime more in taxes than is necessary? As early as possible, learn how taxes work and use it to your benefit so that it's not wielded against you to your detriment. Number 7 is a little controversial. I would not borrow money for school in most cases. If you feel I'm being too aggressive or that I shouldn't say these things, I would remind you that I have spent over a decade meeting with hundreds of people who are navigating federal and student loan debt. On average, if I meet with a medical professional, they owe over $400,000. On average, if I meet with a dental professional, they owe over $500,000. We've seen people who haven't been able to buy a home because of student loans, people who haven't been able to have children because of federal student loans. I am acutely aware of the burden that comes with repaying federal student loan debt. So as a result, here are the only scenarios where I would borrow money for school. Option 1, in those scenarios where you're pursuing fields that have an almost guaranteed path to that level of income, I think it can be worth it. And when I say guaranteed, understand you could be a financial advisor, you could be an HVAC repair person, you could be an electrician and make those amounts of money or more, but it's not guaranteed. You have to be exceptional. There's not like some path where if you just do this for a certain number of years, that's the amount of money that you make. So you can do these things without having to borrow a dime, but there are very few fields like medicine, like dentistry, where you know that if you finish your studies, it's an almost guaranteed path to $250,000 of income or more. So in that case, I would consider it worth it, even if you're borrowing a significant amount to do so. Option 2, and this actually works for high income earners, but even if you're not a high income earner, I'm okay with you borrowing for school if you're pursuing a field that is eligible for the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program allows you to walk away from your loans in full after 10 years worth of payments. There's a number of strategies that you can use to minimize the amount you pay during those 10 years. And as long as that program exists, I'm less concerned about the amount of money you borrow for school because you won't have to be burdened with it beyond a certain period of time. That's very reasonable. So in that scenario, I'd be okay with it. And number 3, you're borrowing for school, but you're borrowing less than the average professional in that field makes on a yearly basis. An example would be if you're pursuing elementary education and you're projected to make $50,000, $60,000 a year, I'm okay with you borrowing for school if you're borrowing less than $50,000, $60,000 in total. The reason I use that line in the sand is because you're borrowing an amount that you can reasonably expect to repay in a given period of time, and you're not leaving yourself beholden to the rules of income-driven repayment plans, because after July 1st, the only option available for new borrowers will be the repayment assistance plan, which requires you to pay for 30 years until any eligible loans are forgiven. So if you don't fall into one of these 3 camps, I just flat out would not borrow money for school. If it meant taking 10 years to get a 4-year degree because I went to school for a year, worked for a year, went to school for a year, worked for a year, that's what I would do. Or I would pursue a field that didn't require a degree in the first place, and many of them don't. Because even though I loved my college experience, I met most of my friends there, I met my wife there, I was able to do it with no loans. And if that's something I could prevent for myself, I would do so at all costs. Number 8, I would build a public presence and a secondary income source that was tied to my main source. Now, the latter part of that was very specific, but let's deal with the former, building a public presence. I think that everyone, whether they work for someone or whether they work for themselves, should be documenting their efforts publicly. If it is a newsletter, if it's daily LinkedIn posts, if it's a podcast, if it's a YouTube channel, the same thing I said about the email addresses, where I see no downside to collecting a community of people who know what you're doing. I see no downside to posting regularly about what you're doing, displaying your expertise, making yourself valuable to an audience. And I think it translates no matter where you end up going in life. Now, when it comes to a secondary income source, especially if you work for someone else, I think that when you have a secondary income source, or if you're a business owner, it needs to be tied to the main source. I'm not a big fan of having side hustles that have no connection to your main hustle because I think it distracts you from the time that it takes to truly become an expert in whatever you're actually pursuing. This was a big reason that I stopped pursuing real estate because it was taking time, money, and effort away from me becoming a better financial advisor. But what I am okay with are secondary income sources that are tied to the main source. An example for me would be public speaking, escape student loan debt, consulting agreements. These are things that I do on a year-to-year basis that all involve the expertise that I gained as a financial advisor, but I'm just charging differently than I do in my day-to-day work. There have been several people that we've met from escape student loan debt who were not aware when they met with us that we also have a financial planning arm. And when we tell them, hey, this is a separate business, but it's something that actually offers more than this specific area that you're looking for, we can pick up a client because of how we've established ourselves through that secondary source. So to me, I think it's valuable to have a secondary income source. It insulates you from tough economic times, but in a perfect world, I would encourage you to have that second income source tied to the main source. Number 9, I would be a generalist specialist. And this is another one that requires a little explanation. It actually came from our friend Danny Andrews, another person who was on the podcast, another episode that we'll link to in the show notes. But we had Danny on when you first started seeing these bloodbaths of layoffs that we've talked about ad nauseum over the course of the past year or so. And we were talking about negotiation. How do you negotiate a job offer? How do you negotiate retention and refreshes of company equity? How do you negotiate a company exit? And one of the things that Danny was talking to me about in some of our conversations when he consults with people on career advice and what they should pursue is, don't think of yourself as a marketer. Don't think of yourself as someone in HR. Think of the skill sets that you have and try to build a resume that's open to all things that cater to that skill set. For example, if you're someone that's in graphic design, you can spend 30 years of your career in graphic design and not pursue any other industries where you can utilize similar skill sets. But then you put yourself at risk of 10 years from now, AI being the thing that handles all graphic design, where maybe the skill set that you have would make you a good fit for product design. If you're an educator, whether at the elementary, the high school, the university level, you can teach and do nothing else but teach, or you could open yourself up to potentially doing instructional design for a corporation. Whatever the case may be, especially in the age of AI, I think we're headed towards an economy where there are not really these clean labels of what you do for the entirety of your career. So whatever your field, or whatever my field I chose when I start over, instead of looking at a department, I would look at a skill set, and I would develop a skill set, and I would try to, if I had my pick, go from company to company, developing and pursuing jobs with that skill set that had a wide range of job titles. And the skill set is the specialization. Being able to deploy it in different roles is the generalist element. And having both of them married together would hopefully be something that bulletproofed me from job layoffs, from economic hardship moving forward. And the last thing, number 10, is not very technically difficult. Keep your eyes on your own paper. Don't look from side to side to see what the next person beside you is doing. Don't worry about what someone is doing financially. And if I had to start over, someone would already have a head start. No matter when you start, someone already has a head start. In some cases, they're doing better than you. In some cases, there's more context under the surface and they're not doing anywhere near as well as you think they are. But regardless, it's not your business and it's not helpful to pay attention to, especially if you're comparing it to where you are financially. Those are my 10 things. And I'll tell you, as a member of our community, I would love to hear what some of your 10 things or one thing or 3 things are. You can always learn from other people's perspective, and I'm always down for a life lesson. If you're willing to share, send me a note at info@newmoneynewproblems.com. And I'll be right back here with a new episode next week. See you then.
Let's get some money.
From New Money, New Problems, this was the New Money, New Problems podcast. A show for successful professionals searching for the tools they need to navigate financial opportunities and obstacles they've never seen.